My brother mocked my labors at a party, joking that I would always be penniless as long as he drove Dad's Mercedes. So I stopped talking to him and let him drown in his own debts. Family's supposed to be safe. That's what they tell you, right? That no matter what happens out there, the missed chances, the bills, the long nights, your family will be the place you land. But sometimes, family is where you fall the hardest. I should have known better the moment I walked into Michael's party. His voice was already echoing down the driveway, loud and performative, as if he were on stage. The music pulsed through the walls of his rented home, paid for by loans, half-truths, and our parents' generosity. Or maybe stupidity. I was there because I promised Mom I'd show up. She said, just for an hour. He misses you. He didn't. He missed the version of me that didn't make him uncomfortable. The version that stayed behind the scenes, that clapped politely when he announced his next get-rich-quick scheme. That version had died quietly about a year ago, but I hadn't sent out a funeral notice. The second I stepped into the kitchen, I saw the familiar circle. Michael surrounded by his entourage. Guys from high school who peaked in their 20s. Real estate wannabes, crypto bros, ex-athletes turned loud drinkers. Michael lived for their attention. Always had. And tonight I was his target. He spotted me and lit up like he'd rehearsed the moment. There he is. My hard-working little brother. The room turned, eyes locking on me like I was part of the entertainment. Still grinding that 9 to 5? Someone asked with a smirk, holding a half-full IPA. Michael clapped him on the back. Come on, don't make fun. He's doing his best. Not everyone can afford to take risks, right? Laughter. I forced a tight smile. My face always gives me away, but I held it. Seriously though, Michael continued, fully in performance mode now. He's always been the responsible one. You know, the guy who saves receipts, who worries about credit scores, who still drives the same Civic from college. I swear, one day we're gonna build a statue to that car. More laughter. Someone whistled. He wasn't done. You know what my mom said once? Michael leaned forward, voice dropping to a mock whisper. She said, one of you will chase dreams, and one of you will chase coupons. Guess who's who? I stood frozen. I felt my face burn, but I didn't move. I didn't give them the show they wanted. The thing is, I used to laugh at stuff like that. I used to join in, try to seem chill, try not to make it awkward. But over time, I realized I was always the punchline. Not for one joke, for years. There was that time I loaned him $2,000 when he just needed a float before his crypto coin hit. He ghosted me for 2 months, then came back with a bottle of cheap whiskey and a joke. Consider that your dividend. Or the Thanksgiving he brought up in front of everyone how I still lived in a one-bedroom, while he moved 3 times in a year on purpose. I used to bite it down. I thought that was just how brothers are. But standing there at that party with strangers laughing at a version of me that was never true, something shifted. I wasn't mad. Not in the usual way. I was tired. Tired of pretending it didn't sting. Tired of giving people like Michael space they didn't earn. Tired of defining loyalty as putting up with constant disrespect. I took a sip of water, breathed, and looked at my brother. Michael, loud, reckless, debt-ridden Michael, laughing at me to cover his own fear, because that's what it was, wasn't it? Fear. Fear that I saw through him, that I knew how shaky the ground under his feet really was, that no matter how many parties he threw, or how many Instagram flexes he posted, it wasn't real, and I had stopped pretending it was. I looked around the room and realized, no one here would remember this moment, but I would. I quietly set my glass down, walked past the kitchen, past the hallway lined with framed photos of Michael's parties, and out the front door. No one followed me. He didn't call my name. Didn't say, come on, man, it's a joke, because to him it wasn't. To him, I was the role I'd always played, the reliable one, the backup, the safety net. I got into my car, yes, the old Civic, and sat in the driver's seat. The keys trembled in my hand. Not from rage, from clarity, because in that moment, I saw the whole damn blueprint. Our childhood, our teenage years, our adult lives. I'd always been the support beam to his badly constructed tower. I remembered birthdays where my gifts were practical socks, books, secondhand sneakers, and his were iPhones and gaming systems. I remembered watching him destroy relationships, burn bridges, fail upwards, while I was praised for being the stable one. But stability is exhausting when it's only ever expected, never appreciated. That night, sitting in the dark of my car with frost forming on the windshield, I made myself a quiet promise. I'm done playing the background. I will build something he can't laugh at. Not to prove him wrong, but to remind myself I was never the joke. And this time I wouldn't say a word about it. I'd just do it. In silence. In motion. In full. I didn't respond to Michael's messages. Not the first time, not the 10th. They came in waves. Text, voicemail, even a DM through an old social account I barely used anymore. Bro, it was just a joke. You know how I get when I drink. Don't do this. We're family. But family, I was learning, is a choice. And I was done choosing people who treated me like an afterthought. I started slow. I didn't reinvent my life overnight. I just stopped answering calls I didn't want to take. I made my apartment feel like home. Hung shelves, cooked real meals, played music in the evenings that no one could criticize. I built structure where chaos used to live. I took on extra shifts, signed up for online courses. I stopped waiting for someone to hand me permission to grow. I gave it to myself. A few weeks after the party, I ran into an old coworker who told me about a freelance opportunity, something I normally would have second-guessed myself out of. But this time I applied, got it, delivered, got another one, and something started to shift. I felt it the first time I opened a new checking account and transferred money into savings, not much but mine, untouched, quiet. I felt it when I turned off my phone and didn't check it for hours. I felt it when I deleted Michael's number. He tried other ways, called our mom, asked her to talk some sense into me. She left me a voicemail. Just call him back, sweetie. He's your brother. He's not perfect, but he loves you. But love isn't what you say when you're caught. Love is what you do before the damage is done. I didn't call her back. Instead, I opened a notebook and wrote 5 rules. 1. Don't give to those who mock your giving. 2. Don't shrink to make others feel tall. 3. Don't mistake noise for success. 4. Don't explain your healing. 5. Don't answer to people who only remember you when they're falling. Michael was falling. I heard through a mutual friend that he missed a car payment, that one of his investments tanked, that he was looking for a new place to live. Still, I stayed quiet, not to punish, to protect, because I knew the second I let him back in, the cycle would restart. And this time, I had no intention of rebuilding someone else's collapsing life at the cost of my own. This time, the only thing I was rebuilding was me. I remember one night a few weeks later, a Thursday, rain tapping at the windows. I'd just come home from a double shift, shoes soaked, body aching. I should have collapsed. Instead, I stood in the center of my living room and looked around. It was nothing fancy. A thrifted couch, books I'd read twice, a kitchen that buzzed when the fridge turned on. But it was mine. No one had criticized how I folded towels. No one had told me my dinner smelled weird. No one had drained the last of the milk and left the carton. It was quiet, and I loved that quiet. I started writing again. Not for anyone. Just thoughts. Journals. Pages filled with truth I'd held in for years. Michael once told me I'd never be successful because I didn't dress the part. Today I made $300 from a client I got in sweatpants. Little victories. I started collecting them like gold. I began meal prepping. I learned how to change my own oil. I even planted a tiny herb garden on my windowsill. Nothing grew for weeks and I was okay with that, because for once I wasn't rushing the process. Growth takes time, and I was finally giving it the time it deserved. Every now and then, I'd hear updates. Michael blaming the market. Michael saying he was between ventures. Michael trying to get friends to co-sign for a new apartment. And still, my phone stayed silent. I wrote another journal entry. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. I repeated that to myself every morning. Then one day, I got a knock at the door. It was our cousin Drew. He looked uncomfortable, holding a plastic grocery bag and avoiding eye contact. Mike asked me to come talk to you, he said. He's in a bad place. Said he's sorry. Said he's changed. I invited Drew in, made him tea, let him speak. Then I said calmly, I'm not angry. I'm just done. He nodded. He's not used to consequences. I know, I replied, and I'm not going to be the one to spare him from them. Drew left. I closed the door behind him and leaned against it, heart pounding. That conversation wasn't about Michael. It was about me. I had spent years bending so others wouldn't break. Now I was learning to stand. The next day, I got my first client through a referral. Real money. A real deal. I danced in the kitchen like a fool, arms raised, no music playing. Just joy. I called no one. I celebrated with myself. And it was enough. It started with a text. Hey, you free to talk? From a number I didn't recognize. But I knew who it was. He never kept a number for long. I stared at it. Let it sit on my screen while I made coffee. I watched the steam rise before I deleted the message without replying. An hour later, another one. Please. It's important. No details. No apology. 2 days passed. Then a voicemail. Slurred voice. Tired. Desperate. Look, I messed up. All right? Can we just talk? I need someone to talk to. Call me back. Please. I didn't. Because by now I understood. His need was a bottomless well. And I was done throwing myself into it. I started hearing things. From friends. From mutuals. He'd been kicked out of his apartment. Car repossessed. Credit cards frozen. He was couch hopping. Still, I said nothing. Somewhere deep down, a younger version of me stirred. The one who wanted to fix everything. The one who believed that being the good brother meant catching him every time he jumped with no parachute. But that younger version had grown up. I saw Michael once. At the gas station near my place. He didn't see me. He looked smaller somehow. Not in size, but in presence. His shoulders hunched. His phone pressed to his ear. His free hand gesturing like he was begging someone on the other end to listen. I watched from across the lot. He looked like a man unraveling. And for the first time, I didn't feel responsible. I felt free. That night, I wrote, sometimes, loving someone means letting them feel what you always protected them from. And I slept without guilt. A week passed. Then 2. My phone stayed quiet. No more texts. No more voicemails. It was the longest stretch of silence between us in years. At first, it felt like I was waiting for the next shoe to drop. I kept checking my phone out of habit, expecting the familiar sting of guilt disguised as obligation. But it never came. Instead, peace did. I started spending more time on things I actually enjoyed. Cooking slow meals. Walking in the park. Picking up books I'd meant to read for years. Reconnecting with people who saw me for who I was, not who they expected me to be. My world didn't collapse without Michael in it. It grew. One day, I bumped into Sarah, a mutual friend from high school. We hadn't talked in a while, but she always kept tabs on everyone. You heard about Mike? She asked. I paused. No. What now? He's crashing with Aaron, but it's not going well. Apparently Aaron's fed up. Said he comes and goes, doesn't contribute, eats everything, and brings drama. I nodded, not surprised. She hesitated. You think you'll ever talk to him again? I thought about it. I don't know, I said honestly. But I'm not angry anymore. And I wasn't. Not really. Because somewhere between his silence and mine, I'd stopped carrying the weight of his choices. I wasn't ignoring him to punish him. I was letting go. A few nights later, I got another message. This time from a shared acquaintance, someone I barely knew well. Hey man, sorry to bug you. Mike told me to reach out. Said he's in a really bad place. Asked if you could meet him. Just once. Just once. Funny how people always say just once, when they mean start over. I didn't respond, but I sat with it for a long time. I thought about all the times I came running. The nights I drove across town. The loans. the lies, the apologies that were really just delays. I thought about the years spent being the fallback, the safety net, the emotional crutch. And I thought about how good it felt to stand up on my own now. No weight on my shoulders. No shame clouding my every step. I wasn't healed, but I was whole. So I wrote another journal entry. He's falling, and for the first time, I'm not underneath to catch him. And that's not cruelty. That's survival. A few days later, I passed by a cafe I hadn't visited in a long time. It was the place where Michael and I had once dreamed big, before all the pretending, before the resentment. We'd sat in the corner booth talking about businesses, travel, freedom. We were kids then, naive, hopeful. I looked inside. The booth was empty, and I realized something. I missed who he used to be, but I didn't miss who he had become. That evening, I took out my notebook and wrote a letter. Not one I'd send, just one I needed to write. Michael, I hope you figure it out. I really do. I hope you wake up one day and realize that love isn't something to be withdrawn and deposited like a bank account. That trust can't be built on apologies without change. That being loud isn't the same as being right. And that I was always rooting for you, even when I walked away. This isn't revenge. It's release. Me. I folded it, tucked it into the back of my journal. Then I poured myself a cup of tea, opened a book, and let the quiet settle in. It was the kind of silence that holds, not hollows. And I finally understood. Sometimes, falling without a net is the only way someone learns how to land. It was a Sunday morning, the kind where everything feels still. Sunlight filtered through my blinds, the kind of soft gold that made everything look gentler than it really was. I was slicing up fruit, listening to an old jazz playlist, thinking about absolutely nothing for once. Then the doorbell rang. I almost didn't answer, but something in my chest said, go see. Michael stood on the porch. Same hoodie from 2 winters ago. Hair a mess. Eyes bloodshot. A backpack slung over one shoulder and nothing else. He didn't smile. Hey, he said. I didn't say anything. He looked down at the ground, then up at me. I don't know where else to go. For a second, I saw flashes of us as kids. Building pillow forts. Racing bikes. Watching cartoons while eating cereal straight from the box. Then I remembered the rest. I stepped outside, pulled the door gently shut behind me. You can't stay here, I said. My voice surprised even me calm. Certain. He blinked fast, like he didn't understand. I'm not trying to start over, he said quickly. I just need a place to crash. Just a few days. I shook my head. I can't do that, Mike. He swallowed hard. You serious? I nodded. I'm not angry, I said. But I've changed. And this version of me doesn't bend backwards anymore. He ran his hand through his hair. Took a shaky breath. I've got nothing, man. And for the first time I saw it. Not the Michael I resented, or the one I used to protect. Just a man at rock bottom. Not because life beat him down, but because he never learned how to stand on his own. I hope you find something, I said quietly. He nodded. Once. Twice. Eyes wet. But he didn't argue. He turned and walked away. I stayed on the porch until he disappeared down the block. Then I went back inside. Sat at the kitchen table. Ate my fruit. Let the silence wrap around me. It didn't feel cruel. It felt clean. Later that day, I went for a walk. The streets were quiet. Spring in the air. A softness I hadn't noticed in years. I passed a bench I used to sit on when I felt lost. This time, I didn't sit. I kept walking. I stopped by the market. Bought flowers. For no one. Just because they looked like peace. Back home, I placed them in a jar near the window. Watched them shift in the breeze like they had nowhere to be and all the time to get there. I opened my notebook. Wrote, some debts are too expensive to pay with your peace. I thought about all the emotional transactions over the years. The ones I made without knowing it. The ones that cost more than they were ever worth. Like the time I drove 4 hours to pick Michael up after a fight with his girlfriend only for him to fall asleep in the passenger seat and wake up without saying thank you. Or the time he borrowed my laptop and returned it cracked, blaming me for not warning him how fragile it was. Or the time he told our parents I was too sensitive when I asked him not to make jokes about my job in front of strangers. It adds up. And eventually you learn to stop paying. I made dinner that night. Something simple. Pasta. Garlic bread. I opened a bottle of wine and lit a candle. Not for anyone else. Just me. That meal tasted better than most. Not because of the ingredients, but because of the silence. It was the first time in a long time I ate without bitterness sitting beside me. After dinner, I stood at the window watching the streetlights flicker on. Somewhere out there, Michael was facing the consequences of years he never thought would catch up. And I wasn't angry about it. I hoped he found something real. Something that wasn't just fast money and loud crowds. I hoped he found whatever it was he needed to become someone better. But I knew it wouldn't be through me. Because sometimes stepping back isn't abandonment. It's the only way to stop enabling. The next morning, I got a call from my mom. I hadn't spoken to her in a while, not for any specific reason, just because I was learning to love quietly. Her voice was soft. Careful. Michael told me he stopped by. I said nothing. She sighed. He's hurting. I nodded even though she couldn't see it. So am I. There was a pause. Then, I know. I'm proud of you. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a speech. But it was enough. I hung up. Sat down. Let it land. Later that evening, I wrote. This isn't a victory. This is a return. To myself. To boundaries. To balance. And no one gets to bankrupt that again. I closed the journal. Turned off the lights. And slept in peace.